I've been getting a lot of requests from a lot of you on doing a video dealing with disabled widows or widowers benefits. Well, I like to say that your prayers have been answered, because in this video, that's exactly what we're going to be dealing with. How someone who was a widow or widower can actually get SSDI benefits on their deceased spouse's record. If you're ready for this, let's get it started. You may have heard me mention on other videos how there is only one lane on the SSDI Highway, and that is true. But how that lane looks can differ based on the circumstances. And it also depends on what record that you're applying on. If you're applying on your record for SSDI, then that will be a typical disabled insured benefit claim. That's like the main lane on the highway. Then there's either disabled widow or widower's benefits or childhood disability benefits, or also called DAC, which is like the emergency lane on the highway. It's not an actual lane on the highway unless you really need to drive on it for emergency purposes. For this video, our focus is on disabled widow or widower's benefits, otherwise known as DWB claims. So buckle up, because it's about to get a little bumpy. A DWB case is when a widow or widower applies for SSDI benefits on their deceased spouse's record. The deceased spouse was insured at the time of their death because they met the insured status requirements or the work credits. The surviving spouse is then able to apply for DWB benefits because they are disabled and are no longer able to work. There are cases when a person can apply for SSDI on their record, and they can apply for DWB on their deceased spouse's record. This is really a rare situation where they can apply for both, but it does happen. Now let me share with you the eligibility requirements for someone who wants to apply for DWB. The first requirement is they have to have reached 50 years of age. That's across the board. A person has to be at least 50 years old to apply for DWB. The second requirement is they have to prove that they were married to their spouse. A marriage certificate or some kind of proof of marriage that is likely certified will suffice for this. Here's an important piece to this. You had to have been married not less than 9 months before the day your spouse passed away. There are a lot of exceptions to this policy. For instance, for some people, that 9-month requirement doesn't need to be met. That's where talking with your Social Security rep at your local office, or maybe at the 800 number, can come in handy to deal with this matter. One of the things that really needs to be understood is the person applying needs to be unmarried. There are no remarriages happening after the deceased spouse at the time you're trying to apply for SSDI. Again, there are some exceptions to this policy to where in some cases the remarriage may be disregarded. But we're not going to get into the weeds on that. That's where you get in contact with your local Social Security office or the national 800 number and explain your situation, and they can deal with the policy that applies to you. The third requirement is the deceased spouse had to be fully insured for SSDI. In other words, they had to have the work credits built up on their record. The fourth criteria is you have to have a disabling mental and or physical impairment. That's pretty standard. Nothing new there. Here's the fifth requirement, and this one is the big one. You have to have been found disabled before your prescribed period ends. Now, the prescribed period kind of works like your date first insured and a date last insured for a typical SSDI claim where you're filing on your record. The prescribed period is basically the window of eligibility for DWB. The prescribed period usually starts with the month the deceased spouse passed away. The end of the prescribed period works like the DLI, like I mentioned a moment ago. If you can't establish a disability before the end of the prescribed period, your chances of getting DWB are slim to none. The prescribed period ends with whichever of these two dates is earlier. 7 years after the prescribed period starts, which is about 84 months, or the month before the month the widow or widower reaches age 60. Now, there's also something called a controlling date. The controlling date is the latest date you can establish your onset without affecting the first month you can be entitled to benefits. Also, it is the date the DDS uses to start developing your medical evidence, in other words, requesting records from your doctors. The controlling date could be any one of the following: your alleged onset date, which is the date that you say that your conditions began or began to keep you from working. The potential onset date, which is the date the DDS can use to set your onset without even getting into your medical conditions. The end of the prescribed period, the date you remarried, or the first day of the 5th month before you were entitled to benefits. And what I'm talking about here is your 5-month waiting period. Yeah, I already know this is all confusing. So let me give you the bottom line. The onset of your medical condition needs to be established before the end of the prescribed period. The factors of your case will be different than other people applying for the DWB benefit. AOD, POD, 5-month waiting period, yada, yada, yada. Everything hinges on the prescribed period. And your controlling date is the date where the DDS can begin developing medical evidence to try to establish a medical onset date. DWB cases can be a little tricky for the average person like you to wrap your head around. So my recommendation is this: if you are a widow or widower and you believe that your deceased spouse may have been insured for SSDI that will enable you potentially to apply for DWB, then check in with your local Social Security office or call the National 800 number and find out what the eligibility is. You may already be entitled to SSDI. You may already be getting SSDI. But if you meet the requirements, then there may be a possibility that you can get SSDI and DWB at the same time. And I'll take care of it for this video covering disabled widows or widowers benefits. I hope this gave you a little bit of light. But again, check in with your local office if there are any questions you have. That's all I got. There's more videos. As always, don't leave me hanging, because I'm going to see you on the other side.